Today I want to tell you about a journey that I've been on for most of my life. Ever since I was a kid, I've heard tales of Bigfoot and wild men while spending time with my friends and family. As I grew older and read more about the paranormal, my interest in cryptids and other things strange only deepened. That's why I'm so excited to share with you what I've personally become involved with, the Untold Radio Network. The Untold Radio Network is a live streaming podcast network that airs a new show every day across all podcast platforms, YouTube, and more. They have 8 different shows on all sorts of exciting topics, such as Bigfoot, cryptids, UFOs, aliens, and much more. I even have my own show called Weird Encounters where I talk about all things strange. This is more than just a podcast network. It's a community that allows me to meet so many amazing people who share their stories and experiences with the strange. If you're interested in hearing more of these stories and learning more about the paranormal and cryptids, make sure you check out the Untold Radio Network for all kinds of exciting shows. It's free to subscribe, so what are you waiting for? Visit www.untoldradionetwork.com today.
911, what are you reporting?
I got a strange going on out here. Something just killed my dog.
Something killed your dog?
My dog went flying through the air over the tree. I don't know how it did it.
Okay.
Damn it, I'm really confused. All I saw was my dog coming over the fence, and he was dead when she hit the ground. I didn't see any cars. All I saw was my dog coming over the fence.
What are you reporting?
We got someone or something crawling around out here.
Did you see what it was?
It was standing up. I'm out here looking through the window now and I don't see anything. I don't want to go outside. Jesus Christ, you better...
Sir?
See ya!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh.
Hey there, this is Brian, and welcome to a very special episode. It was recorded about a week ago when I found myself at a little get-together at the Texas Bigfoot Research Conservancy. We had come together in our first group meeting following the conclusion of Operation Persistence so that we could discuss in person our experiences and to go over some of the preliminary data that had been collected over 3 months out in the bush. Afterward, I was able to corral some of the TBRC members and get them to share a little of what had happened with you. At some point, I do expect the TBRC will publish a summary of Persistence, just like it did last year after Operation Endurance. But in the meantime, what we have here is just this little taste of some of the amazing experiences to come out of this place that we call X. I expect many people won't or can't believe what they're about to hear. All I can say in response is that I know these men and women in the TBRC very well. Some of them are as close to me as my own family. You have my word that everything you hear is absolutely true. And with that, I'll just let these recordings play. First up, I have a conversation with Alton Higgins, Paul Bowman, and Daryl Collier, respectively the TBRC's chairman, vice chairman, and field operations coordinator. We discussed the operation in general, how the men thought it went, and some of their own personal experiences. Alton is the chairman of the TBRC. How would you characterize the recently concluded Operation Persistence?
It was a great success as far as I'm concerned. I should say maybe I was a little disappointed in that not all of our objectives were achieved, but we still learned an awful lot. We have a lot of interesting data. We've had a lot of interesting experiences. In that sense, many of our members consider it a life-changing event.
People have said that they did leave X with an entirely different sort of mindset than what they went down there with.
Yeah, absolutely. Quite a few of our members went in at 98% conviction level regarding the species existence, the wood ape. After a short period of time, left with 100% plus conviction of the species existence.
We're here at the Bowman Ranch, and our host, Paul Bowman, who's vice chairman of the group. How would you say your thoughts regarding this subject changed as a result of Persistence?
They really changed last summer during Operation Endurance. That was the biggest change for me. I'd always been a 95%er, I like to say. Never had an experience per se, never had a sighting. I always pretty much within my heart believed that these things existed. For some reason, there was about 5% doubt. After last summer, that was completely obliterated. I went in this summer with high hopes, of course, of obtaining all of our objectives. Was highly disappointed and quite irate, I might add. For those insiders that know me, at the conclusion of Operation Persistence. However, especially with this weekend coming to a completion, we've learned so much. It's mind-blowing how much actual data we've gained after this summer. That's just remarkable. We've learned so much about their habits. It's almost invaluable, all the intel gained. And it was really easy to not realize that. It's almost like you couldn't see the forest for all the trees because we were fixated on basically obtaining a specimen. Just the overall experience has just been incredible. The sightings, all the incidents that have taken place, it's invaluable.
One of the things the TBRC does when we go out is we take extensive field notes. So the difference between going out into the woods for a week and having some experiences and telling your friends about them versus collecting data. Daryl, you presented some numbers regarding that. Could you just give us the highlight of the amount of data, the types of data that we collected over the course of, 3 months?
Yeah, Operation Persistence was a 3-month operation. There were 11 teams that participated in Operation Persistence. Each team was deployed for 1 week. At the end of that week, the team would leave and would be replaced by another team. So we had that continuity. As opposed to having a 4 or 5 day operation, we had a 3-month operation, which is unprecedented. From that, we collected a vast amount of data, and we've only analyzed 10 to 15% of that data to this point. We still have a huge amount of data to go through.
Actually, one of the logistical challenges is we've collected gigabytes and gigabytes of audio and video data, and just trying to disseminate that amongst the group to process it, to look at it, is a logistical challenge that we didn't really think about going into this.
I think it's important to point out the TBRC is not a loose confederation of different individuals who just go out and do their own thing. We're very much a coordinated organization. We do things in a coordinated way because some of us have a background in the military and we bring that to bear. But then we also have a number of individuals who have a science background, and that comes into play. It's a unique fusion.
You got one person with a marketing background. That comes in very handy when you're out in the field.
It's very much a coordinated effort. Each team, of course, keeps detailed field journals, which are very important. They're running equipment. They're running cameras. They're running audio equipment. There's just not enough time in the field to go through all those data. All the data then has to be analyzed. We have thousands of hours of photographic data now that we've got to pour through because we don't know. We may actually have photos.
And that's from the plot watcher cameras, the ones that are running all day long in time-lapse mode. So basically from dawn till dusk, there's 6 or how many of those that were running?
There were a dozen. And we know that some of those cameras were manipulated by some unknown entities because when we deployed some of them, we'd go back 2 hours later and they had been twisted around on the tree. We don't know what did it, but the point is something manipulated those cameras other than the teams that were there. The teams were largely comprised of anywhere from 2 to 5 individuals, 6 individuals. I think a couple of the teams had 7, 8 people. At this point, we understand if other people don't really want to embrace what we're saying we experience, we understand that. For instance, now we know, at least the experiences we've had tell us that these are not solitary animals, that where there's one, there is likely to be others. These animals are not nomadic. What we've been dealing with now is a group of residents in a particular area that are not leaving. They haven't left. They're still there.
And they've been there for quite a while.
Years. They're not exclusively nocturnal. In fact, I wouldn't even say that they're mostly nocturnal. But these are some of the myths that have been promulgated as part of this. And there are other things that we're just not going to talk about right now, but we had hundreds of events that we cataloged during Operation Persistence.
So what kind of events, when you say hundreds of, what are you talking about?
Events such as rocks being hurled at our investigators. Our investigators actually throwing rocks at an ape, and then the ape throwing the rocks back. And that happened a number of times. Wood knocking, sweaty horse smell, which is a smell that is associated with these animals. Visual encounters, at least 11, trying to remember exactly, but at least 11 of our investigators.
Which is amazing to me because up until last year during Endurance, you had the first visual sighting of anyone in the TBRC after a decade of going into this area. That was number 1. And now we've got over a dozen people who have had visual sightings, some of them quite clear, unmistakable animals.
Absolutely very clear. These were not, when we say clear visual, what I call a visual contact, it's clear. mean, you can readily identify that's what you're seeing. That's what I mean by that when I say a hard visual contact. Head, shoulders, legs, torso, arms, so that you can rule out any other sort of animal. We've had a number of those now. At least 11 of our people have had hard visual contacts with a number of others that were possible visual contacts. And by that, they saw a large flash of gray hair and a crashing noise as this animal ran across the creek or whatever. They weren't able to see the head or the arms. They could just see this big flash of gray fur or hair. That's a possible visual. Have had a number of those. What we did is we broke all the events down to 19 quantifiable events that we tracked. We came up with hundreds and hundreds of different events. Trying to think of some of the others. Banging on the cabins, banging on metal. Those are other things. Some other quantifiable events that occurred.
That's what the field notes, we took copious amounts of field notes. And getting back to the variances of our membership, the diversity, we had people that would sit in camp and literally just catalog everything that we saw, everything we heard, no matter how minor. Say a team might go a week's time and think, it's been pretty slow in here. We haven't seen a whole lot of activity. Hadn't been much going on. Upon further reflection and review of those notes, when you look at it as a whole and the big pictures, oh my God, it was raining rocks this week. We cataloged 40 wood knocks in 3 days' time. So that was instrumental, I think, in collecting this data.
One of the things that we were talking about earlier is a lot of people in this field, they go into the woods, they hang out for a week if they're lucky, they hope to have an experience. That's what they talk about for the rest of their lives, right? But if you're writing everything down, you realize that in amongst those punctuation marks, there's all kinds of little litter of activity going on. You wouldn't record because there's just too many details to keep track of.
We went into this knowing that what we were doing was an observational field study. This was not going to be a 3-day little jaunt out into the woods. It was an observational field study and a quantitative field study. So that's what we did. We set out to record, document our observations, and then to quantify the behavior that we observed. Over a 3-month period, it boggles the mind how much you can actually document if you're in the right place, if you're paying attention. Getting to the point Paul was making, when you're in that environment, a lot of our people got numbed to the experience. You start to take these things for granted, and it takes something really spectacular sometimes to really make you think that you had some kind of a significant week or whatever. You'll go in there and you'll relieve a team and say, oh, not much happened, just like you said. It's because they become numb to the cabins being hit by rocks and massive crashing sounds happening, wood knocks that are just as clear as a bell. And they just become numb to this. And anything less than a sighting almost seems you had a slow day.
Back in the days, you and I had a conversation about some stuff that was happening in Oklahoma, almost 10 years ago now. One of the observations you made was that you felt that they were nomadic. Now we no longer believe that. Is that the most surprising sort of myth that was busted for you? Or what do you think is the most interesting piece of information that we've put together from this?
Yeah, I can say that in agreement with Daryl, that this group that we've been studying for the last few years, that they definitely appear to be resident. I wouldn't go so far as to saying that no wood apes anywhere don't wander around or whatever. But yeah, I've changed my mind. The solitary question, I think, was one of the big ones. They were in the orangutan mold as far as being mostly solitary. That certainly does not appear to be the case with these animals. There's a number of them in there.
So we've had experiences with, at any one time, up to 4. So we know there's at least 4 contacts in the area.
Yeah, our perception now, we lean toward being more chimp and gorilla-like. In fact, I can't think of any of the traits documented as being more orangutan-like. They seem very chimp and gorilla-like.
So we've had this conversation a couple times in the past few days, but there's somewhere between some of their social structures appear to be gorilla-like, but some of their use of tactics appear to be chimp-like. They're somewhere in between, as far as we can tell.
If someone were to ask me to quantify it, I would go with 60% chimp and 40% gorilla-like. Fortunately, we have not experienced a chimp-like temperament. Bluff charges, rock throwing, making loud vocalizations, beating on wood, beating on metal, just making noise, very chimp-like. Thrashing vegetation, very much like gorillas. So, yeah, I mean, we're definitely seeing these animals. Let me say something else. Nothing we have seen at all lends to the notion that they are some lost tribe of humans. Nothing whatsoever. Everything we have seen is pure, unadulterated ape behavior. The vocalizations, the bluff charges, the intimidation displays, the curiosity, all of it, every bit of this, the raw smells, they're apes.
The reason we call them wood apes, because they act like apes. They don't act like hairy people.
If I may, a lot of people that are followers or enthusiasts of Bigfoot phenomenon may be disappointed by that notion. But if you really stop and think about it, it's absolutely incredible to think that we have a higher primate, a bipedal primate at that, who happens to be as large as this one is, in North America that's been literally undiscovered for centuries. I mean, that in itself, you take the mystique away from the whole notion of a Sasquatch and a Bigfoot. And if you just lay that aside for a minute, the whole monster aspect to it, and you really consider what we're dealing with, it's just as incredible.
Facts are more interesting than the fantasy.
Findernagle would say that it has been discovered, just hasn't been recognized.
Daryl, in and amongst the hundreds of more mundane, quote unquote, I'm using air quotes here, experiences that we recorded, the rocks and the trees and that sort of thing, what are some of the more memorable ones that you're willing to disclose at this point?
As we discussed in the retreat today, there were about 1/2 or so that we highlighted in the retreat. The first of which was my sighting in the first week on Thursday of the one that we now refer to as Old Gray, because he's huge and he's gray from top to bottom. I had a very clear visual contact. I saw his legs. I saw him step up on a boulder, step into the woods on the bank, and he disappeared.
How many members have seen that particular animal? We think a gray, large one. How many do we think have seen that animal?
Old Gray has been seen twice by Travis Lawrence. I saw him or her one time. I had a very quick, fleeting glimpse of an upright gray figure. It was indeterminate. I think we have to classify it as possible contact because it was just a quick gray figure ducked down into the creek. I just didn't really get any detail. I just saw a gray flash. I would say probably 1/2 people. 2 of us have seen him really clearly. Travis saw him twice. I saw him once, and then the others were possibles. Some sort of gray flash, that sort of thing.
So how big is this guy?
That's what was very disconcerting for me when I saw Old Gray in the creek. Because at first, I really didn't have a frame of reference until my partner, Rick Hayes, came back. He had gone down the creek to attend to some plot watcher cameras. When he came back, I had him go stand on the rock where I saw Old Gray. That's when it occurred to me, the sheer magnitude of the size of this animal. It unnerved me because Old Gray was every bit of 8 feet tall, no doubt about it. 700 to 800 pounds. The legs were humongous. They were thick. The buttocks were huge. It was gray from top to bottom. The feet were light colored. It was either the soles of the feet, the light coloredness extended up onto the sides of the feet. But I saw the feet clearly. I saw the legs scissor, step from the rock up onto the bank. In fact, my eyes were focused on the lower extremities of the animal because that was where the movement was. I don't really remember seeing the arms. They were there. I remember in a flash seeing the head, but I didn't really took a detailed account of the legs, the buttocks, and the feet. That's really what I focused on. So Old Gray was just a huge animal. There's no doubt about it. And it was quiet and smooth, unbelievably smooth, because when Rick did the reenactment and he stood on the rock, he really had a hard time just even stepping up onto that boulder. And then he couldn't step to the bank because it was almost 4 feet apart. This thing, it stepped onto that rock, up onto the bank like it was nothing.
What I saw, what you saw, I think that's one of the, if there are a bullet pointed list of a few things that we take from our encounters, is their grace. There's a lot of bears in there, but bears have no grace, right? These things are like it's a ballet. They move beautifully. Alton, how about you? What experience, either your own or someone else's, what stands out from the 3 months that we were down there?
Other than falling off the roof of the cabin.
Well, that was research. You were in the midst of some sort of data collection experiment. But anyway.
Well, it's always fascinating to me. I did fall off the roof, broke my leg. The reason I was up on the roof is one of the things that most fascinates me about this whole experience that all of us have encountered these last few years now, finding rocks on this roof. Hearing the rocks impact the cabins, and they're big rocks a lot of times. Yeah, not all of them are softball size. Sometimes they're size of a couple of golf balls or so. But when you're in the cabin, and you're hearing rocks hit the building, hit the roof, the nut question is completely obliviated when you go up there and you find rocks. I'm talking in the plural, and we've taken a lot of rocks. People have had rocks thrown at them in other places besides the cabin. When you're out away from the cabin, you know that there's an animal that's following you. It's made the decision to throw a rock at you for whatever reason. That would have to be a shocking experience. I haven't had that experience. Paul has. So that's one of the things that comes to mind. Seeing the things out there, Daryl mentioned the number of dozens of possible sightings. My son-in-law and I were taking a short walk. We weren't very far away from the cabin, and we had one of these kinds of possible sightings that Daryl was referring to. We saw something that was very large. We could see that much. It was brown in color. It looked vertical, but we did not see any details as far as swinging arms or hands or legs or anything along the lines of what Daryl observed. But nevertheless, we heard a very large crash, talking like feet off the side of this trail, extremely dense vegetation. You can't see past the edge of the trail. And we heard and saw this very large creature crash away from us. We went in to try and see if we could find it. We didn't observe it. But when you see something like that, that makes a mark in your memory too.
So, Paul, what stands out for you?
To give a little background, I've been going down there for the better part of 7 years, probably. Camera maintenance trips. Most of my experiences are collective experiences. But this summer in particular, I broke one of the cardinal rules, and I split off by myself and decided to go upstream a little bit and scout. I didn't go very far. I went about 250 yards upstream from the cabins. And I just crossed the creek. This is the one spot where there's some actual water. I got across to the mid part of the creek where there's a little island. What I was doing is I was walking maybe 5 or 10 yards, and I'd stop and I would listen and be still for a few minutes and just try to take in things and look around and be real still and quiet. Then I'd move maybe 5 or 10 more yards. That was my whole plan. So I had just stopped, and I'd been stopped for maybe 5 seconds. I heard a faint, something hit above me in the canopy, a leaf or something. It's a kind of sound. And a rock impacted in front of me, probably about maybe 2 yards.
How big was that rock?
I couldn't really say. I didn't see it in terms of, I didn't see it moving, but I heard it. It had to have been the size of maybe a small baseball, probably. Because when it impacted in front of me, it hit a rock and then bounced. When it hit the rock, it bounced off the rock and then landed in some soft mud. So it was very distinctive what it was.
Landed close to you, 5 feet?
Yeah, it was very close, 5, 6 feet, maybe closer. My first thought was, that was a rock that was just thrown at me. And
threatened?
The thing was, I was by myself. I was upstream. Most of our activities the last 2 summers have been around the cabin areas and downstream a little ways. So this was upstream, and I knew there wasn't anybody around. So I felt, the first thing I thought was, here we go. It's on now, buddy. I had my rifle with me, and I drew my weapon. I had it slung on my shoulder. So I drew my weapon, and
The Marine.
I went down on one knee, and I immediately scanned the area, and it became readily apparent there is nowhere around me where this thing could be, where it could toss a rock at me, where I wouldn't be able to see it, with the exception of to my south, because there was a little bit of a knoll in the middle of this island. Where else would this rock have come from? You're out in the middle of the creek. It's not like there's a ledge or a mountainside somewhere where it could be dislodged. All these thoughts were real fluid in my mind. I just sat there thinking, okay, what do I do now? I thought I could charge over this little knoll, or I could go around it. And that's what I ended up doing. For me, that was a pivotal moment because I was by myself. I experienced it by myself. And it seemed pretty clear and logical what had just happened. Yet I couldn't find what did it. I moved pretty slow when I went around this knoll. I thought, I'm powerless. I'm at this thing's mercy, really, if you really want to get down to it. It was a pretty profound moment for me.
Profound because obviously you're a trained Marine, you're armed, but you're in its territory and it has total control of the situation. You have no idea where it is or even what it's thinking or if it's still around you.
Also, you can sit and talk about the rocks being thrown at the cabins, but to sit and think about, to realize the enormity of being out on a creek by yourself and having a rock come out of nowhere, thrown at you by an unseen force is pretty disconcerting. In an area where it's not like I'm in a city park. with some kids behind the merry-go-round. That's the enormity that hits you when you're out there. That was a pretty big experience for me.
You know, I remember the first time I went down there, you guys let me go down there. We were talking about rocks then. I remember there was a healthy skepticism among the group. In fact, when we were there, we heard the big boulders being chucked, and those seemed pretty clear. We couldn't figure out what else those could be. And I remember everybody going, oh, that was a nut. That was a nut. But in retrospect, those weren't nuts.
As part of Kilo Team, I had been there 20 minutes. Got out of my truck. I walked around to the back of the cabin. I'm standing there looking up the slope of the mountain where so much activity occurs. All of a sudden, wham on the cabin to my left. I turn and look. There is a softball-sized rock hitting the roof of the cabin, being lofted from the slope of the mountain, hits the cabin roof, everything on the cabin roof, all these nuts, the tree bark, everything that had fallen on the bounces up. The rock bounces off the roof onto the ground. Okay, I saw that with my own eyes. It was not a freaking nut.
In 2008, when we were down there, we're like, oh, that's a nut. Yeah, we explained it away.
Also, in contrast, we've seen nuts. I have to admit, though, that last summer and the summer before and all the other times before, I was just as skeptical.
Paul and I were part of Alpha Team. That's the first team that went in this year for Operation Persistence. We were there for a week. Paul and I engaged for over 2.5 hours in what we now call a rock war.
Describe the rock war.
The rock war is we're sitting in camp chairs in front of the cabin. All of a sudden, we hear, it's a rock. And those first sounds I made were the rock coming through the leaves and the branches from the slope of the mountain. Then we hear it impact with a thud on the ground 10 feet from me, and it bounces and hits another rock. Did you just hear that? They just threw a frickin' rock at us.
They would come in every 20, 30 seconds or maybe every 2 minutes. Very random. But what was funny is you'd get one that would impact closer towards the cabin, between us and the cabin. Then you'd get one that would be past us towards the teepee, even farther distant from us.
Over to our side.
And then we'd have them over to the side, and then we'd have one hit behind the cabin.
One hit
He
the
stumbled
roof of
on
the
that one, yeah.
cabin, and then we would start throwing rocks back.
Yeah,
when we started throwing rocks back up onto the slope, we would throw the rocks, and whatever it was, it started backing up. When it threw rocks, the rocks wouldn't even make it out of the trees. We could hear the rocks impacting the limbs and the trees, and then impacting the ground behind the cabin. So when we started throwing rocks, engaging them with our own rocks, it backed them up.
Because it was retreating.
Intimidated because we were throwing rocks. I bet they've never encountered humans who threw rocks back, because we're a bunch of old baseball players. So we had some pretty salty arms. I'm sure they probably didn't quite know what to make of us.
Keep in mind, it's dark. This started happening after nightfall. We had a campfire for light.
Not very bright, though.
We were throwing back basically towards the mountain.
With a lot of force, but we were throwing hard.
We were clearing the cabin.
You hear our rocks land way up on the slope.
Right. This went on for
2.5 hours. Incoming rocks every 30 seconds, every minute. And then we would pick one up and throw it, pick up another one, throw it, and then here comes another one. Incoming. It bounces around on the ground below. It's the roof of the cabin. I said, Paul, you realize what's going on here? We are interacting. We are having a rock war with an unlisted species of ape. This is just incredible. It's mind-blowing.
How many, and you don't have the numbers in front of you, but everybody had these rock experiences. Every single team. Is that true? Every single team had rock experiences?
Question today at the retreat, who among us experienced rock throwing? Every person. There were 30, 35 people here. Every one of them raised their hands. We documented over 280 rock throwing incidents over the 3-month period.
And I know it was more than that because I was one of the guys writing in the journal. And I remember specifically writing one night, it's too much for even to keep. I'm not even going to bother writing it down anymore because there's too much happening.
I wrote the same thing on different occasions.
We all experienced these times where there was just too much going on in terms of rocks being thrown or wood knocks, whatever, just to write down. We couldn't even keep track of it. And I know this people just aren't going to be able to wrap their minds around this.
I put myself back 10 years ago, right? What I knew of the subject was what I read in John Green's books and what I read on the BFRO's website and what I may have seen on TV, but there wasn't much TV back then. Everyone's impression is solitary animal, nocturnal, infrequently interacted with. But what we are experiencing, the area that we're in, that we are so lucky to be in, all of that stuff, I'm not saying that all that stuff is wrong, but there's so much more to it than that. So if you're listening to us right now and you're having a hard time believing it, all I can say is, how many people were involved in persistence?
over 30 investigators. I think it was about 34.
And to a person, every single one of them will back up everything we're saying right here. They can't all be lying. We can't all be making this up. It really is incredible. I continue to pinch myself that we're even down there.
Stay tuned for more Sasquatch Odyssey. We'll be right back after these messages.
Travis Lawrence spent 40 days and 40 nights. I spent 19 days. Rick Hayes spent 13. Ken Helmer spent 13. A number spent 9, 10, 8 days. Most people, they're going out for 2 days, if they even go out at all, in a year.
There were times where we would have a large impact on the cabin, and we'd hear something behind the cabin, and we would take off after.
Investigated, absolutely.
We would tear off up the mountain in pursuit of this thing, and eventually tuck her out, usually by the first shelf, about halfway up. Because I can imagine somebody out there listening going, how do you know somebody wasn't up there camped out up on top of that mountain? They just come down, they're just harassing you guys. It just isn't possible in this scenario.
It's not humanly possible. The terrain is prohibitive. There's no way. You can barely traverse the terrain during the daytime.
We had a member last year in a tree stand who came down after being up there for hours. He went up at dusk. He came out at 2 a.m, and he convinced himself it was a bunch of hillbillies, a bunch of rednecks. What happened to him this year?
He no longer has that opinion. He tried to sleep in a little pup tent, and he got approached, circled, he got growled at, rocks thrown at him.
You can feel the thumping of the footfalls
Around the horse smell, the howls, wood knocks. There were 2 or 3 of them around him.
So that he came up to the cabin, and what did he say to y'all when he got up there?
I know you're not going to believe me, but there's apes out there.
You had a similar experience, Alton. You were out there in a tent, and you could feel the ground move as well.
Oh, yeah, that was one night. I was out there 4 or 5 nights. I made myself bait. I wanted one of the other guys to be able to observe this teepee. Paul put this gigantic teepee out there. I was sleeping in this teepee. When you're in something just separated from the outside by cloth, you can hear everything. I was sleeping on a cot that had legs, and one night I could feel and hear like these deep thuds, and the spacing of them, I thought they were the footsteps of something really heavy and really close. And you can not only hear this deep impact, but you can feel it through your cot.
We've been talking for 40 minutes, and I feel like even though we've said a lot, we've just scratched the surface of what happened over those 3 months.
I think one thing that I would like to drive home is that when you look at Operation Endurance from last year, which is similar in duration, and then you combine that with this year's Operation Persistence, the TBRC has conducted an operation that is 6 months in duration. There was a respite, but if you combine those two, it's 6 months of uninterrupted field study. That's unprecedented. Nobody else can say they've ever done that. It's never even been attempted in studying this animal.
You're the field operations coordinator. What's up for next year then? Or what happens now?
We finished the analysis of all the data that we accumulated during Operation Persistence. Then we use that data to fine-tune our own game. Then we get back in the ring and we go again.
A big part of this weekend was not only going over the data, but also talking about what we did right, what we did wrong, how we're going to do it differently next year. We've learned things not only about the target animal, but about how we interact with them.
We're not interested in the perpetuation of this myth. We are interested in solving this mystery. It's pure and simple, and that's it.
As hard as it may be for some to believe, that's true, because until it's solved, we can't do the real work of the organization, the conservancy part, until they exist. And right now, they don't exist.
They are a myth to the scientific community. They're a myth to the government. They're a myth to most of the masses in the world. Until we overcome that obstacle, the belief that it's a myth, nothing counts, period. That's what has to be accomplished first. You've got to move it from the room of myth into the room of reality. That's what we're attempting to do. At this point, nothing is off the table. Whatever it takes that is legal and what we believe to be ethical, we will do. Paul?
I wanted to say that earlier we talked about some of the data that we gathered, some of the figures, the numbers. When you look at the operations, both of them combined as a whole, we broke the mold. I'm not saying that you can apply this to all regions of the country or the world for that matter, or for all people who are actually engaged in some level of field research or endeavors, but For example, by looking at your experiences and looking at all the different experiences that everyone had there, we could extrapolate that it looks as though they're moving in a counterclockwise direction. That's not to say that the wood ape, that's what he does, but he seems to be doing it in that core area that we're researching. We've gleaned that from looking at these nodes, and it's easy to see patterns emerge. Those are things that we've learned that we can apply in the future tactically in terms of trying to get a species or have a sighting even, just making contact with this thing. The same thing with the wood knocks. Nobody was a bigger skeptic of wood knock than I was. And that changed last summer for me. It's almost a non-issue. It's just matter of fact now. If you told me that 2 or 3 years ago, I'd be like, whatever.
We're actually figuring out what they use them for. They use them to announce when people are coming into the valley. They use them to announce people leave the valley. We know that. We've observed that a dozen times.
Exactly. That's the kind of data that we've been able to glean from this, which is huge, I think. But also, it's proven to me as a critical thinker, as a skeptic of a lot of things, it's okay to break the mold. And it's just like we were saying, we've learned that they're not completely nocturnal, if at all nocturnal. That doesn't mean that they aren't nocturnal at some times. That doesn't mean they're all nocturnal. But most of our sightings have been in the daytime.
They're up all the time. They're up at 2 a.m, up at noon.
And I want to point out to our fellow researchers that they have some weaknesses. We've uncovered some weaknesses, and I'm going to pass that on to you because we think it can be exploited. And if any of you can exploit these weaknesses to end this mystery, please do. They're not good at tracking multiple humans. That is a weakness. If you can use that, if you can exploit them through that, then go for it. I am telling you, we are telling you, the TBRC is telling you, they are not good at tracking multiple human beings. Another weakness is their insatiable curiosity. You can use that and exploit it. It might lead you to some very valuable data collection.
I know we've been villainized in the past couple of years about our stance about taking a specimen. That debate aside, that's not to say that people that are out there that are in the Pacific Northwest, that are in East Texas, Idaho, the Rockies, wherever the case may be, that are out there actively researching this, they can't use the same tools to exploit their weaknesses and maybe obtain a photograph, or even if just for their own, to satisfy their own curiosity, to have a sighting. Point is that even if you're a no-kill, pro-kill, doesn't matter. As a researcher, you can still use this data that we've learned for your own exploitation of their weakness to have an encounter.
Several of the encounters that we had across the operation, we believe a direct result of it not knowing where we were. Even the one that we had during Bravo, we now don't believe that the two that we perceived before they went up the hill knew that we were sitting over there, because they don't keep those multiple targets in their head very well. They can suss you out pretty easily, so that they're good at finding you, but they may not know you're there. And that's another thing we think they use rocks for, is to get you to react so they can see you scatter and count you up again, so they know where you are.
Absolutely. When I saw Old Gray did not see me. Old Gray did not even know I was there. What it did know is my partner, Rick Hayes, was walking up the creek, and it was very interested in tracking and following him.
This shadowing behavior is something we observed many times, where when we're out there, they're shadowing us. They're not necessarily keeping us in sight, but they're keeping tabs on us for whatever reason, because they're curious, because they want to know where we are. But this shadowing through the forest, we observe that.
Yeah, John Meinsinski, when he was with us, was it 2 years ago? He experienced that same thing, that shadowing.
And again, we've all heard the story of the crunching in the forest. That is a common story, but it's also a common thing that we experience down there.
There's a lot of bravado and sensitivities and hurt feelings within the so-called community. There's a lot of diverse people that are looking into this, that are interested in this, that are enthusiasts, for whatever the reasons may be. I would like to say that, especially as a board member of the TBRC, we don't perceive ourselves as being these godlike experts. I don't personally feel that we're trying to portray these facts or theories or this data even as the be-all, end-all of, we figured out their habits. It's not that at all. Just like Daryl said, we're in this to solve the mystery, to find the truth. So if you're out there listening and you're interested and you have ill feelings about the TBRC or not, or you're ambivalent, just know that all of this, we're trying to use this to a common end. I don't think that we're trying to say, hey, you need to do it this way. To me, it's very enlightening and very exciting. We know so much. We hope to grow from that. But I hope the rest of the community can take something from that. Instead of looking at us with a negative light, and say, hey, maybe these guys are onto something. Maybe we should look into that aspect.
It's almost like a web in that every time we think we glean something, it opens up 3 more questions. Every time we think we've perceived something from our observations and the data, it fires through. Why do they do that? What's the point of that? That's what we're doing it for. That's why you're out there, right? You want to answer these questions. Thanks. I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to wander downstairs back into the party, and I'm going to try to pin some people against the wall and have them tell me what happened to them. Somebody will talk to me. But thanks you guys for hanging out.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks for having us.
So we went downstairs, and I expected to find everybody just milling about, playing pool and guitars, just like they were when I went up to start my conversation with Alton, Daryl, and Paul. But instead, I found the entire group had gone outside and were sitting around in the dark, watching the Perseid meteor shower. So standing next to a post about 20 feet from them, I talked to 4 more members of the TBRC. First, you're going to hear from Rick Hayes, then Bragg McAndrews, followed by Jason Hill, and finally Travis Lawrence. Rick Hayes, what teams are you part of down there in over Persistence and X?
I was with the Alpha and the Delta teams.
You're a relatively new member to the group.
That is correct. First excursion.
Obviously, you had an idea of what the TBRC was, joined the group. We went on a training weekend, but what was your expectation going down into X?
I really wasn't expecting much. I heard all the stories. I've read all the reports, and I really wasn't expecting that to happen to me. But boy, was I surprised.
They started out in the earlier was saying that you've had probably the most exciting first day of any TBRC member, but I mean, it started pretty much immediately.
We had 2 other members there with us, along with Daryl and I. And as soon as they left, it seemed to just crank up from that point. The very first thing that happened, I think, was a loud scream and banging out some metal. I look at Daryl for kind of feedback, and Daryl said, "They're here." Okay. I think that the next thing that happened is we heard this large crashing sound that I think Daryl described as like a Volkswagen crashing down through the mountain. I look at him and he's like, "They're here." So we'd been out, had placed some cameras along this creek, this little camera array that we set out. We got back and I'd taken down all the coordinates of the cameras. So we're inside the cabin writing down the coordinates. And all of a sudden I hear footfall, jogging footfall outside, running past the cabin, just right outside the window to my back. I look at Daryl and I said, "Did you hear that?" He goes, "Yes." "What'd you hear?" And I said, "I heard a jogging footfall." He goes, "They're here."
So how many, this is your, what, 3rd night?
This was pretty much, I think this was the 2nd night that we were there.
2nd night you were there. Because you were with Daryl, or you were out there with Daryl when he had his sighting of the gray one. What was that like from your perspective?
Basically, what would happen was we're going out to an outpost. Daryl asked if I would go down and change out the memory cards in the cameras. And I said, "Sure." He said, "I'm going to stay here in the post while you go down." So I go to the 1st camera, the 2nd camera, 3rd camera, 4th, all the way down the array that we set along this creek. As soon as I get back, Daryl looks at me and he says, "Why'd you go to camera 2 last?" I said, "I didn't. I went in order." He looked at me and he said, "I saw a wood ape." I said, "Really?"
At that point, he was trying to wrap his head around the fact that he had seen this thing, and he was making sure that it wasn't you that he saw.
Exactly. I confirmed that, no, I did go in sequence, camera 1, camera 2, camera 3, all the way then and then back. And what we figured is while we were walking down towards the camera array, it followed me on down the array and lost track of Daryl. Completely lost track of him, which led to his sighting.
So you, after a little while, you tried to put yourself in the position of this ape. What was it like boboing that encounter?
It was awkward. I could not repeat what this animal had just done. I stumbled up on this rock, and Daryl asked me, because basically the creature came across the creek, stepped on a rock, and then up on the bank. The bank was quite high. I could barely step on the rock, and there was no way I could step up on the bank. Daryl, I think, realized exactly how big this creature was and became visibly disturbed, which made me disturbed.
And it's hard not to be when you realize that you just saw something that's 8 feet tall, basically.
Apparently, it dwarfed me. I think that's what the term he used. It dwarfed me. He looked at me and said, "You've got to get out of here. We've got to get out of here." As we were crossing the creek and heading back towards the cabin where we were staying, we noticed a track, a push-off track, a partial track. I looked at Daryl and I said, "Do you want me to take a picture of this?" His response was, "Hurry." So I'm looking at him going, "Okay." I said, I've got a measuring stick. Can you pull it out so we can get the proportion, the size of the track and everything? And he's, "Hurry." And we had planned to stay into the night. We had brought night vision, thermal, everything. We were staying after that. But after he determined the actual size of this creature, he was wanting to get back to the cabin before sunset.
So you were there, was that a week for Alpha? Is that how long you were there for Alpha?
Yeah, I was there 8 days.
And you wanted to come back for more. You were there for the rock wars. You were there for all that. You wanted to come back.
Rock wars were amazing. We're sitting out in front of the cabin and a rock comes flying through the trees. You can hear it coming from the trees and hitting branches and leaves as it comes down and lands on the ground beside us. Daryl picks up a rock and throws it back. And then all of a sudden another rock comes back. I pick up a rock and throw it. Another rock comes back. I'm just amazed. I had no idea all these things were happening. My expectations were, this is not going to happen to me, but everything started happening. It was just amazing.
When these things start piling up on each other, you're almost like, this can't actually be happening to me. Not me, right? This is stuff I read about.
You read the reports and you think, okay, I'm going to go out there and nothing's going to happen. And all of a sudden these things start happening. We start hearing the noises, the vocalizations, the rock throws.
So then you came back for, was it Delta Team?
Delta Team, yeah. I had a little bit extra time I could take off. And after I left that area, as we were driving out, I missed my wife, missed my family. But in another aspect, I didn't want to leave. This place is amazing. So I talked to Daryl and I said, I want to go back out. And he said, there's another team that only has 2 members. If you can at least go out for part of it, that'd be great. Help them out. So I volunteered for the Delta Team also.
So you were there how many days in total?
13 total.
So when do you want to go back? Soon. So nothing that happened has dissuaded you from spending more time down there.
It was just so amazing. Like I said, I didn't expect anything to happen, and I had so much happen.
All in all, pretty good first experience with the TBRC.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Thanks for talking to me. I appreciate it. I have now Brad McAndrews, a TBRC member, actually a longtime TBRC member now. You've been in the group for how long?
5.5 years now.
How long were you down in X over persistence?
5 days during the reconnaissance and then 4 days over the summer.
So what was the most memorable experience from your time down there this summer?
I've known this animal exists for some time, but some of the unique experience I've had over the years have been rock clacking, rocks thrown in our direction, what you might call wood knocks that we started to really pay attention to maybe 18 months ago. Over the summer, something that was unique to me were maybe 2 things. One of them was just fantastic. It was jaw-dropping. It took place at I was up till about 4:30 a.m. talking with one of our colleagues. At about 5:30, he went to sleep. About 10, 15 minutes later after that, we had a large rock hit the roof. Of course, I actually had finally passed out, and I didn't hear that at all. The audio recording was pretty fantastic, though. It was a large rock. At 6:30, roughly, I think it was about an hour later after that, it was twilight. It was getting fairly light outside. And I've heard about this. Before we started doing these 4 different occasions, there have been these, what we call cabin slaps, but I don't know if flap is the appropriate word for it. These are more
like a head-on collision.
Like a dozer hitting your building. When I first heard some of the guys actually describe it, it was hard for me to believe because the sound that they said it made was almost too fantastic. But lo and behold, 6:30 in the morning, I was in a top bunk. I'm lying on my back. There was just this enormous impact. I woke up immediately. My eyes open. I was looking at the ceiling. Everything was shaking. It was so powerful that I was thinking, no way that just happened. There's no way this is real. But at the same time, I'm taking in visual information and I'm hearing everybody start to go nuts because it jarred everybody at the same time. So I was thinking, no way could that actually be real because that was enormous. And everything's shaking. There's dust coming down from the rafters. I think one guy ran out of the cabin. Other guys were just screaming. I think it did knock the foundation off that one corner of the cabin.
This is not up to building code.
No, this is definitely not up to building code. The structure's been there over 40 years. That's almost half a century. This is an area that gets sometimes 90 inches of rain a year. That's just an enormous amount of precipitation. There was no maintenance. It was just being eroded by the elements. But anyways, I've heard of this happening before. That was one experience over that 4-day period. It's almost like you can imagine if you're in a 800 square foot structure, imagine a 3/4 ton truck, maybe riding its brakes, foot off the gas, riding the brakes. It would be harder than that. If I went 30 yards and then ran straight in the building, it was much more of a heavy impact.
At the time that the rifles that were leaning against the wall fell over, it was a mayhem inside the cabin.
One of our guys had a bedside table. He had a rifle, had some stuff sitting on his bedside table. And it jarred him. We think it actually hit in the room that he was in. It knocked his rifle halfway across the room. Everything that was on a bedside table hit the floor. And he thought maybe he had jerked and kicked the bedside table over. When that happened, everybody else, we're like ants getting kicked out of an ant pile, and we were just going crazy.
Which actually could have been the whole point of it.
No rhyme or reason, man.
What I experienced was not a slap. It was a gentler motion than that. It wasn't a violent motion like that. But that wasn't the only time that we've experienced that there. So If someone's trying to come up with an alternative explanation, more power to them. What could cause that? Like a deer running into the cabin? It was bigger than them.
No, I don't even think that a 400-pound Bruin hauling ass hitting the side of that cabin could make. I know that sounds fantastic if you're listening to this, but literally, I don't know that a 400-pound bear running at full speed hit that. Maybe a 400-pound bear running full speed straight into the side of the cabin, 100% of his kinetic energy going into that cabin. It was about that powerful.
But if it was a 400-pound bear, he then got up and immediately fled the area in a way that you guys did not detect him in any way.
Well, the other interesting thing, and I've had rocks thrown in my direction, and I've experienced this. I've seen rocks hit the shed and the building around us, hit the ground around us. Right before we left at the end of my stay there, something that, for me, that was unique that I've never had happen before. It put a smile on my face. We're packing up, loading the truck up. Nothing had happened really that morning. It was a quiet night, and that morning we're basically getting ready. We're going to be leaving the next hour. And, a large rock comes down, and you could hear it coming in, ripping through the foliage, and then it hits other rocks. And you could tell, obviously, I didn't see the rock, but I'm guessing it was a baseball size at least, if not maybe a little bit bigger. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. So I sprinted to the backside of the cabin, picked up a rock about the size of 3/4 the size of a baseball, and I chunked it up there. I probably screamed something. Maybe it was maybe 5 seconds later, another rock came down, like literally 5 seconds after I threw it up onto the slope. There was another rock coming down, and it landed 8, 9, 10 feet away from me. Another good sized rock. And to me, it was very unique. I know these animals exist. I had a very in-my-face experience when I was younger, but to have a rock come off of a jungle of a mountainside, and then I throw one right back up, and then one comes right back on me within seconds, you can't do anything else but smile. Because
you're interacting with it.
It's amazing.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, man. Thanks for talking to me. So, Jason, you had an interesting experience actually on your way out. After your time in X, you had something happen to you that was rather peculiar. Walk me through the scenario.
The scenario upon leaving really is pretty crazy. I was on my way out, and for a first time in, I'd experienced different occasions that you try to work out in your head. Rock throws, wood knocks, all that stuff. And then leaving, you're on your way out and you're thinking about all that stuff. And then I ran over a rock and it poked a hole in my tires. Tire went flat. So I had stopped on a flat spot and decided to get my spare out and just change it and continue on. The mechanism that holds the spare up was somehow disabled. I couldn't get the spare down, so I had to hike 1.5 miles back to camp after working on my truck for 30 minutes trying to get the spare out. On the way back, I'd only gotten 50, maybe 60 yards from the truck, and I smelled the wet horse smell, which I hadn't got to experience that yet.
The wet horse smell is something a lot of us down there have smelled, and we have connected it with this animal.
I'd heard about that, and I waited the several days that I was there, waited for that smell, and never did get to experience it until then. That was a first for me. I looked around, then I continued on walking, and then I could hear it following me immediately after I'd smelt it.
You actually heard it in the woods shadowing you.
Correct. And it was clear bipedal footsteps in the vegetation. Never could see anything. But it was quite unnerving. It's mainly because you can't see it. So I just continued on walking. It followed me for probably 1/4 mile on the right side, and I could hear it at all times and never could see it. And then it switched sides and switched to my left at a 45 angle behind me.
Sort of same angle, just on the opposite side.
Correct. It followed me on that side for a while, and then I heard squishing sound, which I had assumed it was in some marshland or something, which I later found out that there was no water in that general area. It sounded if you had a pair of galoshes on walking in wet marshland.
But there was no marshland where you heard this, so there was no wetland for it to be walking in. Were you aware at that time that during the previous year's operation that Travis Lawrence had heard what he described as a squishing sound?
I was not.
You heard, again, this squishing sound, which we believe now to be some kind of mouth noise, some kind of vocalization, but you were not aware of this when you heard it. So you thought it's walking through mud at that point.
Correct. That's exactly what I thought, because I've made that noise myself walking in the woods. I was not aware of that until I got home and was debriefed by Daryl. That's when he brought it to my attention that others have experienced that same thing in the past, that same weird sound.
How long did this little exchange happen? You're walking 1.5 miles. How long did it take you, do you think, to get from your truck back to the cabin?
In a mile and a half with that going on, I would say probably 25 minutes.
So this was your first real TBRC experience. What did you think?
It's quite unnerving. Whenever I left, I remember I was trying to collect all my thoughts, and I thought, I don't know if I want to go back. That's a lot to experience. And I grew up in the woods. As a kid, from the time I could walk, my dad used to take me coon hunting, deer hunting, started bow hunting whenever I was 11 years old in the woods by myself. I thought, I don't know if I ever want to go back again because that's unnerving. We hear things that I've never heard before. Put that together with all the stories that you've heard everybody else talk about, and there's no explanation.
Everybody's processes is differently. Rick was saying that he wanted to go back. Personally, I'm with you. At the end of my week, I was like a turkey with little things sticking out. I was done. So here you are now. Do you want to go back now?
I got home, and I was probably home maybe 48 hours, and I wanted to go back. I did go back. The very next weekend, I went back again. Right. I want to go back now, though.
It bugs me that I know that I'm relatively close to it right now, and I can't go down there.
Yeah, it does me as well. Travis is going back tomorrow, and I'd like to go with him. If I didn't have to work, I would.
I appreciate you talking to me, Jason. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
So I'm with Travis Lawrence, who holds the distinction of being the TBRC member who has spent the most time down in X. You were there 40 days, this operation in persistence. In endurance, how long were you down there for an endurance?
21 days, I believe.
2 months in total. You've been down there, some of that by yourself.
Yeah, I was in there for 7 days by myself this year.
After 40 days, what are you thinking? How do you think it changes you to be in there that long? And you're having experiences. It isn't like you're just sitting there on the porch for 40 days. Stuff is happening. How does it change your perception of the area as you're sitting in there for that long?
I think about Steve Irwin, how he used to be, or swamp people, where they do these crazy things. We think they're crazy, but it's the way they grew up, and it's the way they're used to it. Last summer, for example, when I was there for 3 weeks, tended to wear on me mentally, being there that long, going through these experiences, because I went through that. I was so scared last summer as I was going through that. It prepared me for this summer to where I could go through the same type of experiences, but it wouldn't wear on me the same way because I just got used to it. It has nothing to do with being braver than the next guy or anything like that. It just has to do with experience. I had a lot of fun doing it. The 7 days I was there by myself, it was over 3 different periods. I spent 3 days by myself. And then the next time I came in, it was another 3 days by myself, and then 1 day by myself. It was just like, this guy couldn't come in whenever he's supposed to, so I can either leave or I can just stay here. So I was like, I got the time. I'm not going to feel like a wussy if I run off and leave. So I stayed there by myself. It's a really remote location. Things go through your head. You're like, if I yell out here, if I scream, nobody's going to hear me. If I fire off 3 shots, my SOS shots, nobody's going to hear them. So it makes you think about what you're going to do while you're out there. Honestly, during the day out there, I didn't really go out and do much. I probably didn't venture more than a couple 100 yards from the cabin. Mostly what I did was I stayed right around the cabin. At night, I would turn the audio recorder on and continue to collect data for the group. I didn't go out and do much because it's just not worth the risk whenever you're there by yourself and you got no backup. If something goes wrong, there's nothing you can do.
I've seen people tumble in that creek and those rocks are bad news. You hurt yourself down there by yourself. That could be a seriously bad situation. So what do you think, was it the experiences you had were different when you were alone? Do you think that the interactions you were having with the locals, how did they change from when there were other people down there with you when you were in there by yourself? Was there a difference?
I wouldn't say there's a difference really. The way I reacted to them, there was definitely a difference. Because when you're down there with a group of people, you hear a sound that you think is these animals. We'd go after it. I was in there by myself. I would hear a sound and I would sit there. It's pretty interesting looking at the field notes. I went through a series making sounds back and forth with one of these animals while I was there by myself. When normally I would hear a wood knock and I would go after it. But this time I heard a wood knock, and so I got up and I did a wood knock. And a minute later, there was like 2 wood knocks back. I did 3 wood knocks back to it. And then there was like a rock smash. So I went behind the cabin and I started beating on metal with a hammer. We went back and forth 4 or 5 times. I wouldn't have done that if I wasn't by myself, because I would have went after it the first time I heard a wood knock. So that was pretty neat.
Your first experience down there, you felt genuine fear during endurance last year. Did you at any point feel the same way this year? Was it a very different situation for you?
Yeah, it was a very different situation. It comes down to experience on that also. There were moments this year where I got genuinely scared and your heart pounds whenever you're in those situations. But The difference this year versus last year is you get over it a lot quicker and it doesn't wear on you and you don't carry it with you the next day. You going through what you did this summer, next time you go in there, you're going to be a stronger person going through it. You'll know what I mean because you've now gone through what I went through last summer. I got really unnerved twice while I was there by myself, and that's not fun, getting unnerved when you have no one else there. And it was both times at night, which is even much worse.
Stay tuned for more Sasquatch Odyssey. We'll be right back after these messages.
But one time I was in bed, I think it was like 11:30 at night. I'd already turned in for the night. I heard what I thought was voices outside. I was half asleep. And I jumped up out of bed and I fully expected to see lights outside because it really sounded like two people talking. And I got up and there was no lights outside. No, there wasn't any lights that ever came up after that. And I don't know what that was.
That wasn't the only time that I don't know what to attribute this to, but this talking, jabbering sound, which we did record last year during Endurance, but you weren't the only person to experience that. That's some crazy stuff right there.
Yeah, it is crazy stuff, and I don't really know what to say about it either. It just sounded like talking. On the edge hearing that you can't really understand what's happening, but it just sounds like two people talking. So I was like, hey, there's two people out there talking. So that kind of freaked me out whenever that happened and there wasn't anybody out there. The next time, I've heard this sound out there that just sounds like dynamite or something like just big booms. I heard them last summer, and it really unnerved me to hear this sound that it just sounded like a lightning bolt or something, but it was in broad daylight. I guess it was one of these animals picking up a rock and just smashing it. I heard that this summer while I was there by myself at night, while I was inside the cabin. It was just unbelievably loud sound. And it was like three of them. We've got it recorded on audio. And on audio, it sounds like, I don't know, somebody breathing on the mic or something. It's just these loud booms. It's pretty unnerving to hear something like that and then not know what it is. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't like a jet or something. It was just like three booms. I don't know how else to explain it.
That's something else that's been heard by other teens. First time I went down there, you hear these big sounds. And last year, when Daryl was in there, their last day, they heard some just tremendous, and I'm not going to say like a crashing sound, but like something really big and heavy, like Daryl said, like a Volkswagen getting chucked down the creek bed. It's a big sound.
That's pretty much what I came up with last year to explain what happened. Daryl was like, how loud was this sound? I said, like, he was like, did it sound like it was like a 100-pound rock that just got picked up and smashed? I was like, it sounded like it was a rock the size of a truck that just got picked up and just smashed. It was just unbelievably loud, like much louder than a gunshot. I told him that if we had 10 guys, I was 100% positive we could not go and make a sound that loud. There's no way.
We don't know how these sounds are being made. We don't know what these sounds are, but when you're there by yourself and you hear something like that you cannot explain, that's unsettling.
Yeah, you make a good point that we don't know how these sounds are being made. And actually last summer, whenever I wrote up my after action report in my notes, I wrote that I was mostly convinced that I thought these sounds were being made by just natural reasons, like we're in the mountains, rocks split and they fall and things like that. I thought it was maybe some kind of loud boom that was created by natural pressures of some rock falling because it was that loud that I couldn't imagine one of these animals making that sound. But now we've heard it on several other occasions.
And we didn't always hear this. This is the thing. I've been going in there for years and not for long periods of time, but for extended weekends and things, we've not heard these really big sounds before. But you seem to be addicted at this point. Going back in there tomorrow.
I am addicted at this point. It's just like anything else where I've been doing this for almost 7 years now. The first 5 years probably that I did this, I heard an Ohio howl once. I was doing it consistently. And last summer, it was like everything changed. As soon as we did Operation Endurance, it was like I was ripped out of my world. It became real to me as soon as I started interacting with them. Like it's different whenever you believe they exist, but whenever one of them throws a rock at you, it changes your whole perspective. And the same thing happened this summer. You go out there, and I saw several of them this summer. I know that they're real and they're out there. There's this undiscovered species of animal out there, and it's just incredible. And we're trying to prove it. That's what we're doing, and that's why I'm addicted to it, because we're trying to prove an unknown animal. It's unreal that this animal is at large in America today. I find it hard to believe, but it's absolutely the truth because I know they're out there.
How many sightings have you had down there now in total?
I really don't know.
You've lost count.
I would say as far as definite, maybe like 4.
You saw the one we now call Old Gray. You saw him early in a spring reconnaissance trip down there?
Yeah, I saw the one we call Old Gray. I was the first visual of that one. And I I knew that's what it was, like in my mind, because I only saw the upper half of the body for half a second. So then I saw Alex. I saw him like a minute afterwards. He was doing a drive towards me. As soon as I saw him, I knew what had happened, but I got him to do a recreation anyways. And as soon as he did the recreation, it was clear to me that this thing was much bigger than he was. I couldn't tell how much bigger because it was through the thick woods. As soon as I got him back where it was, I couldn't really see him. It was that much bigger than him that I couldn't really see him where it was. So I knew that's what had happened, but it wasn't that good of a visual. I wasn't satisfied until this summer came around. Daryl saw Old Gray. That was really reassuring to me. No, I'm not going crazy because the gray is not a normal color anyways. I guess this summer I saw Old Gray's arm one more time.
We won't get into all the details of that, but you saw his arm come up in a bush, and you say it's big. Try to describe how big this arm was, and you think it was the right arm.
Yeah, it was lit up with a flashlight. It was at night. I just saw, I don't know it was the right arm. I don't know, maybe a foot across, something like that. It was just a huge arm. And I only saw it for a second. It was like we lit the bush up and it turned to run. And I just saw its right arm as it like turned to its left to run. I saw its right arm come around. But that was another definite visual this summer. I saw eyes that pretty positive were these animals on, I don't know, 4 or 5 different occasions this summer. So
describe, what did those look like? These were at night, so you saw eye shine?
Yeah, eye shine, the best one I saw. I gave him the nickname Iron Man because his eyes reminded me of Iron Man character. They weren't white like Iron Man. They were like a yellowish white. It was the strangest thing because if I go through this, picture you're facing north. I was with this guy named John and his son Danny, and John was shining a powerful flashlight to the northwest. Again, we're facing north. He was shining this light to the northwest. To my northeast, it's black up there. There's just a little bit of ambient light reaching the northeastern portions from the powerful flashlight. To the northeast, I saw these eyes. It was like they just came alive in the black up there to the northeast. I couldn't see anything up there except eyes. Like I couldn't see bushes, nothing. It was just eyes. They swept from looking at John towards me, and then they just went down. It was crazy because there wasn't any light being shown directly at them. There was a little bit of light reaching them, so it wasn't like it was just totally black.
To you, it looked like they were reflecting. They were not self-illuminating. They appeared to be a reflection to you.
Yeah, there was a little bit of light for them to reflect. So I would say that it was a reflection. It wasn't totally black up there. But
how far away was this from you?
It was about 20 yards away.
How big do you think these eyes were?
As crazy as it sounds, I wrote in my report that they were about the tennis balls, which is just crazy to me. I don't know how far apart they were, maybe 6 inches or something. And they weren't, the reason I called him Iron Man too is because as crazy as it sounds, the eyes weren't round. They were like kind of an oval shape. And it just reminded me of Iron Man, the way he turned around and looked. And I don't know if maybe he was like, had his head angled to where his forehead was pointing at the ground, to where his eyes weren't round. But the way I saw them, they weren't round. They were like not like a slit like Iron Man, but ovals. Yeah, and it was crazy. And those were bright yellow eyes. I don't know, maybe 2 other times I saw green eyes that were similar to that, and another time I saw yellow eyes again. And I'm pretty sure those were all apes. The only other animals that are the bears, and bears have beady little eyes. If you've ever looked at pictures of bears' eye shine, they're nowhere near that size. This was in conjunction with rock throwing, a bluff charge, a growl, other things that known activity to us from these animals. There was one time I was sitting on the porch. I was there with a guy named Robert Taylor, and I saw an animal. The porch faces to the south. And I saw an animal like 9 in the morning. I was sitting on the porch, my shorts and barefoot, not ready to do anything. I had just gotten up out of bed. And I was sitting on the porch and I saw the back of an animal to my south through the woods, like 50 yards away. It was a reddish brown color. It was a totally flat back. It was an animal that was on all 4s. As soon as I saw it, my first thought was that's a cinnamon colored black bear. I saw it for less than a second, and it was just like a portion of the back that I just saw through a little opening in the woods, like thick woods, and I just saw a portion of a perfectly horizontally flat back. And I was like, bears don't have a flat back. I don't know if that was a bear or not. 5 minutes later, in the direction that it was going, like another 20 yards farther on, I heard this growl, this moaning sound that ended in a growl. And that got my attention. As soon as I looked up, as soon as that sound ended, I heard a perfect little wood knock, just perfect little musical, beautiful sounding wood knock like I've heard numbers of times, straight where it was. And as soon as I heard that wood knock, I knew exactly what it was that I had seen and what it was that had made that little moaning growl sound.
So now you've been down there for a grand total 2 months. What's your mindset now? How do you feel about your experiences?
Probably a combination of both of those. I would have to feel satisfaction about all that I've been through, and just what I've told you here in this little interview is just a small fraction of what I've experienced out there. So I feel satisfaction that I've been doing this for so long. Finally, I get to experience things. But at the same time, you feel frustrated because we haven't proven this animal yet. You feel frustrated because this animal's at large. You go home and you tell people about it. They roll their eyes at you. I really don't talk about it. My family members and stuff, people that know, they tell other people about it. So then people come and ask me about it and they jeer you and stuff. And you tell them, they just think you're stupid. And
all these experiences, they just belong to you. And this is not to diminish them, because I feel the same way about mine. They don't really matter because they just happen to you.
That's what inspires me so much more to want to prove this animal. Whatever method it's going to take to prove this animal, that's what I'm going to try to do, because this animal's real. And I know it's real, and I can't wait to just show people, yes, it's real. We finally did it.
Cool. Thanks, Travis. Thanks for spending some time with me.
Thanks, Brian. Anytime, buddy.
There you go. I hope now that you've come to appreciate what some of us in the TBRC feel we've learned from Area X. These animals are the real deal. Their actions are both reminiscent of other primates, but also unique in their own way. Many things that are considered common knowledge about them is wrong, or at least paints an incomplete picture. They're not always loners. They're not always trying to avoid human interaction. They can be quite social, actually, and occasionally will indulge in a little rattling of our cages as long as it's done on their terms and on their turf. They can be as curious as a child and as dangerous as any other 800-pound wild animal. But regardless of what we think we know, it's clear that we have so much more to learn about them. Their existence has to be proven to the world, and soon, so that their habitat can be properly conserved. I wouldn't be surprised if some thought of X as a kind of Bigfoot theme park. I suppose others will have a hard time believing that such a place even exists on this earth, but it does. Hopefully someday we'll learn enough about the location and its animals to find more like them. It can't be unique, and I seriously doubt we're the first to discover its kind. The TBRC hopes its continued efforts will eventually unlock this mystery, bring these remarkable animals into the full light of the world's attention where they belong. Thanks to Alton, Paul, Daryl, Jason, Brad, Rick, and Travis for speaking to me. Thanks again to the TBRC for letting this story out, and of course, thanks to all of you for listening.